It's 2 p.m. on Friday, October 10th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. Welcome to ARIRANG News. These are the stories we are following at this hour. North Korea sends strong warning messages saying inter-Korean ties will crumble if activist groups in the south continue flying anti-Pyongyang leaflets into the north. Will the Bank of Korea cut the nation's key interest rate next week? The BOK chief says a rate cut cannot be the sole remedy for inducing growth. And with the Ebola scare spreading around the world, health officials call for more support to stop the epidemic, which has claimed nearly 4,000 lives this year. Let's start with Pyongyang's warning to Seoul. North Korea says flying propaganda leaflets into the north will seriously hurt inter-Korean ties. But observers in South Korea say Pyongyang is trying to gain an upper hand and position itself ahead of an upcoming round of high-level inter-Korean talks. Our Kim Young-gil has the top story.
A South Korean activist group went ahead with its plan to fly anti-Pyongyang leaflets across the border on Friday, despite warnings from the north that they would retaliate as the day marks the founding anniversary of the North's ruling Workers' Party. North Korea's agency in charge of inter-Korean relations says that if Seoul does not stop the fighters of Free North Korea from going ahead with their plans, relations between the two Koreas could crumble.
If the South Korean authorities allow the leaflet scattering operation, North-South relations will again be pushed to an uncontrollable catastrophe, and Seoul will have to bear the responsibility.
Tensions have been raised since an exchange of fire earlier this week after a North Korean naval vessel violated the western maritime border. Seoul sees the move as a way for Pyongyang to position itself favorably ahead of planned high-level talks between the two Koreas. Seoul's Unification Ministry has asked the civic activists to think carefully and scrap their plan to give them the best possible chance to improve inter-Korean ties at a critical time. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
So North Korea, as we said, is celebrating the anniversary of the founding of the ruling Workers' Party on this Friday, and all eyes are on whether leader Kim Jong-un will show up for the festivities. The director of the party's United Front Department, Kim Yang-gun, told South Korean officials last week that the young leader has no health problems, but speculation about Kim Jong-un's ill health has been repeated many times as he hasn't been seen in public for over a month now. The party's anniversary is one of the most important events in North Korea, and Kim attended the ceremony last year. The U.S. ambassador to South Korea says Washington is planning to test new forms of dialogue with North Korea. In a recent interview with the South Korean daily Joseonilbo, Sung Kim said the existing six-party framework is still valid, but the U.S. is willing to hold 3- or 4-way talks or even a bilateral meeting with Pyongyang. The six-party talks were aimed at denuclearizing North Korea. The two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia were involved, but the talks have been stalled since 2008. The interview comes as Kim is scheduled to end his term as the U.S. ambassador to South Korea on October 24th. Now, the U.S. is open to different forms of dialogue, but that doesn't mean its North Korea policy will change. This was reaffirmed in an exclusive interview with a former senior U.S. diplomat. Our Hwang Sung-hee sat down with James Kelly, who says there's a reason why Pyongyang is turning to Seoul a lot more these days.
It's interesting that with all the divisions in the American Congress, for example, they are unanimous on not wanting to give any money to North Korea. And as we've seen historically, when North Korea can't get anybody else to give them good things, they turn to their South Korean brothers. And this is good news because any resolution of this issue is going to be done by Koreans on the Korean Peninsula, and not by Americans and not by Chinese.
Now that China is sort of taking a bigger role in the international sanctions against the North, and it's also becoming pretty close with South Korea, do you think that Pyongyang would want to come back to the six-party talks, knowing that it might be outnumbered?
North Korea has never wanted the six-party talks. Certainly at the early stages, it was much more of a 5+1. And when you really get into the issues, all five parties, not including North Korea, all five parties want a denuclearization of weapons on the Korean Peninsula. But I would say that the six-party talks was really the first time that South Korea had a prominent and equal position to everyone else.
Based on your experience as a chief U.S. envoy to North Korea, you've led numerous nuclear talks. Do you think it's ever possible for North Korea to fully give up its nuclear program, or have we come too far to hope for that?
It's possible, but it's not very likely. The nuclear program has benefits that have nothing to do with nuclear weapons or military deterrence or anything else. It is a vehicle that gets North Korea, that would otherwise be one of the more impoverished countries of the whole world, attention on the international stage that it couldn't get any other way. But I see the nuclear weapons question and the whole question of North Korea's isolation and its economic self-isolation from the rest of the world as very closely related problems. And so when you take care of one set of these problems, the others are going to become easier. If North Korea becomes seriously involved in world trade and interactions with other countries, it's going to be less interested in boasting about nuclear weapons that it may or may not have.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for your time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
In the year 2012 for Korea was at its record high.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul.
Shopping market thinks the true meaning of creation shines through. Leaders at international organizations are raising their collective voice to act quickly to combat Ebola in West Africa. An Australian nurse who had served in Sierra Leone tested negative for Ebola, but with more suspicious cases being spotted around the globe, authorities and healthcare professionals continue to call for a swift mobilization of resources. At a conference in Washington, UN Chief Ban Ki-moon said the world needs a 20-fold resource mobilization to deal with the outbreak in West Africa, while World Bank President Jim Yong Kim warned of catastrophic economic costs to the African continent if we fail to act now. U.S. authorities announced that they would add an extra layer of screening for Ebola at the country's 5 busiest international airports beginning Saturday local time. UK officials in the meantime said they would also screen travelers from Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea at their airports, as well as at Eurostar railway terminals. Now, pro-democracy student protesters and high-level Hong Kong officials were set to meet this afternoon, but the formal dialogue has been called off. The territory's #2 official, Chief Secretary Carrie Lam, made the announcement last night, saying calls by student leaders to return to protests had seriously undermined the basis for constructive dialogue. Now, this as a political bombshell has hit the territory's chief executive, C.Y. Leung. Hong Kong lawmakers are demanding a thorough investigation after an Australian media outlet reported that the leader had accepted more than $6 million from an Australian company in a suspected bribe. Leung's office has denied any wrongdoing. Back here in the nation, Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan and Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol are both attending the IMF and World Bank meeting in Washington, and experts say there is a very subtle difference between how Korea's top two financial authorities see the right path of recovery for the Korean economy. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
There's mounting pressure on the Bank of Korea to lower the country's main benchmark interest rate from the current 2.25%. It is expected to make a decision on the rate next Wednesday. The government, which is planning to inject an additional $4.7 billion into the economy on top of other stimulus programs this year, has called for stimulus monetary measures as well. But the central bank chief has a different recipe for the economy. Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said Thursday in Washington that there was little to nothing that a rate cut could do on its own to induce growth, suggesting that other measures will be needed. A rate cut could actually increase the country's debt in the long term, ultimately constraining domestic demand, since the policy would induce households and businesses to spend more despite their growing debt. Instead, Governor Lee highlighted a need for structural changes to induce growth that would bridge the gap between the manufacturing and service sectors and between large conglomerates and small and mid-sized companies. Meanwhile, there are differences of opinion on how the Korean economy is doing. Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan says the economy will grow in the upper 3% range this year, while the BOK scaled back its previous projection to the mid 3% range. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Following last month's expansion of a so-called Creative Economic Innovation Center in Korea's southeastern city of Daegu, the central city of Daejeon marked the expansion of another such center on this Friday. The center is the second of the government's 17 designated innovation centers to have signed agreements with a private firm to offer counseling and financial aid to local SMEs and ventures. The Daejeon Center will focus specifically on ICT and energy. Now, marking the occasion, President Park vowed support for the most innovative startups to be listed on the KONEX stock market and also offered to help them make inroads into Silicon Valley. Tech officials from nearly 200 countries will flock to Busan next week for the 2014 International Telecommunication Union meeting. The ITU is a UN-affiliated organization, and it's the first time Korea is hosting this conference after joining the group more than 50 years ago. Our Song Ji-sun has this report.
It is the world's oldest international organization, originally established to promote cross-border cooperation in wire telegraphs. It is now high-tech, with an agenda that extends to managing satellite orbits. But advanced technology is no longer the only concern for the 193 countries that participate in the ITU plenipotentiary. Narrowing the information gap between nations is one task, as is sharing ICT policy experience and directions to set a common vision for the future by discussing issues like cybersecurity and child online protection. A day before the official kickoff of the ITU Plenipotentiary Conference, the annual ICT ministerial meeting, hosted by Korea for a decade now, will be held at Busan's APEC House under the theme The Future Role of ICT and Sustainable Development with Inclusive ICTs.
Korea hopes to boast its reputation as an ICT powerhouse at this event. It will be a completely paperless conference where all participants will receive updated information on their tablet PCs and smartphones throughout the sessions. We've also set up giga-scale landlines and mobile connections for that.
After hosting the event, the Korean government hopes the impression left on participants helps domestic ICT corporations expand their export channels. The Ministry of Science, ICT and Future Planning also seeks to use this opportunity to promote Seoul's creative economy models by encouraging small and mid-sized companies to exhibit their ideas and products at multiple expos held throughout the 3-week conference. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
So the impact of the ever-advancing technology is being felt in every aspect of our daily lives. For example, when listening to music. Long gone are the days when you had to wait for the CDs to come out. This is great for music lovers, but for the artists themselves, it has its pros and cons. Our Shin Se-min has this next story.
Downloading and streaming services have given music lovers unlimited access to their favorite albums, but for the artists themselves, the technology is a double-edged sword. Four-time Grammy Award-winning record engineer Jimmy Douglas says the shift has made it much more difficult for musicians and record companies to generate profits.
Even though we seem to have entered a new age where the record companies don't quite have the same hold, now the money's gotten away, and now the streaming people have hold of the money. So what happens, the little guy gets totally pushed out of the way, and the big guy is now making more money, which is great for them, but it's just not equitable.
And while the effects of the fast-changing nature of technology has had negative effects, musicians have also used it to their advantage for free publicity.
And sometimes it even leads to contracts with actual record labels. Such was the case with Eastern Sidekick, a Korean indie rock band.
At first, we started out small, but after a couple of gigs at clubs in Hongdae and putting some of our performances online, the size of the crowds grew and grew, and this is where we are now.
Count business manager Eric Sussman among those who have benefited from the changing times. Through a Kickstarter campaign along with the now famous Amanda Palmer, the duo raised more than $1 million in just 18 months. Sussman said similar campaigns could be a good fit for Korean musicians.
Especially with how wired Korea is, it seems to me that getting the message out ought to be very easy. And the more people you reach, the higher your chances of finding the people that will support you. And in that sense, I think the market here is ripe for this kind of action.
Insiders say newcomers will have to take full advantage of the technology already established in Korea to make themselves heard by the masses. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
After 9 days packed with premieres, international films, parties, and of course countless celebrities, the Busan International Film Festival is about to finish its 19th edition. To hear all about this year's event, we connect with our film critic Pierce Conran, who is down in Busan. Good to see you again, Pierce. It looks like you've been enjoying your time in Busan.
Indeed, I have. It's actually my third year here, and it's just as overwhelming now as it ever was. And with umpteen kind of world premieres, the Asian film market, a whole bunch of project markets, and just a huge amount of other events, it's always a lot to take in. But it's very exciting. You get to kind of come around and meet people from around the world, people you see kind of on a yearly basis at the festival, and see some great films, and catch up with drinks and meals with friends. And I'm quite sad that it's all kind of winding to a close tomorrow.
Now, we've been hearing that this year's festival has put a lot of emphasis on Chinese language films. Tell us all about that.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Everyone's been kind of talking about that since the program was announced, and a lot of the main slots of the festival are taken by these Chinese language films. Essentially, there are 6 main slots of the festival, and those are the opening and closing films, which this year were Paradise and Service from Taiwan as the opening film, and Gangster Payday from Hong Kong as the closing one. And then within the 4 gala presentations, which also include the Korean film Lviv by Im Kwon-taek, and another film from Asia called The President. 2 of them are also from China. So we have Coming Home, and we have The Golden Era, which is actually going to be opening in theaters in Korea soon. So a lot of kind of Chinese focus in the program, but also the Asian film market. For the very first time, the SART, which is kind of the the Chinese equivalent of the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, have officially sent a delegation to the Asian film market. So that's a very significant move to see the Chinese government getting involved in the festival for the first time.
Right. I mean, it's not surprising, but what would you say is behind this trend?
Well, for many years, there has been some kind of an alignment of the Chinese and Korean industries. We've seen a number of co-productions kind of pop up over the past, but now that kind of the rate of those has really picked up, and currently they're shooting the sequel to My Sassy Girl, which is called My New Sassy Girl, and that's a co-production with China. Because, of course, the original was very popular there many years ago. But there was also the Korean Film Council and the Ministry of Culture signed a co-production treaty with China earlier this year. And a lot of stars are very popular in China these days, such as, of course, Kim Soo-yeon, whose show with Jeon Ji-yeon, My Love from the Star, was a huge hit there. And so we're seeing a lot of this alignment. I think having all of these Chinese language films and this presence at Busan is just indicative of this kind of alignment of these two industries.
Mm-hmm. Now let's shift our focus back to some of the Korean films. How would you assess the Korean films featured at the festival this year?
Well, of course, I'm always looking at the Korean films that play at Busan. That's, of course, my area of focus. And out of there's a total of 56 Korean features playing, which is, a lot to process. And I've had a chance to see most of those. And as with other years, it's always kind of a mixed bag because with so many new Korean films, we have to accept that, a few of them will be good, a few of them won't travel quite as far. But all in all, there's been a lot of very, very strong films. And certainly some that I know will travel further. But of course, compared to previous years, they've had a little less to choose from because the Toronto Film Festival a few weeks ago held a special program for new Korean films. So they kind of sucked up a few of the premieres that might have debuted here in Busan. So a few less huge world premieres, but at the same time, those films are also screening here.
Mm-hmm. So if you had to choose one, though, what would it be? Which do you think will find a life outside of Busan?
Well, for the brand new films, let's just say the world premieres, there are two that have definitely stood out for me. One of those is A Midsummer's Fantasia, which comes from a director called Jang Kun-jae. It's his third film. His last film, Sleepless Night, was incredibly successful on the festival circuit. It's a small indie drama. It's a co-production with Japan as well, and it's something that I really loved. I don't think it'll become a huge breakout hit on a theatrical run, but I do think it'll go to a few more festivals. And the other one is Lee Kwang-guk's Matter of Interpretation. It's his second film following his debut Romance Joe, which also premiered here in Busan 3 years ago. And the way I've been kind of describing it to people is kind of Hong Sang-soo meets David Lynch, which I know sounds a little incongruous, but it's a mix that really works here. It's a very fun movie, and I definitely think we'll be seeing that in the future as well, going around the world a little bit. And beyond that, briefly, I would mention the films End of Winter, Social Phobia, and Factory Complex, which is a documentary. All films that I enjoyed quite a lot, and I think we'll have a bit of an opportunity to travel beyond Busan.
Mm-hmm. Now, we are running out of time, unfortunately, but the very last question. BIF is often referred to as the Cannes of Asia. Would you say that's a fair title? And has this year's festival lived up to that title?
I think that it is fair to say that. I mean, there's no denying that Busan is the biggest festival in Asia, and just on the eve of reaching its 20th edition, which will be next year, it has been around for a while, and over the years, it's gotten many major premieres, particularly big Asian films. A lot of stars come, and this year the market increased by around 25%, with a lot of kind of foreign delegations from America and Europe coming as well, kind of recognizing the increased importance of this part of the world for the film industry. So and it's growing, it's showing no signs of slowing down. So in short, I'd say it's a major, influential world event that's here to stay.
All right, thank you, Pierce, for bringing us all the latest on Asia's biggest film festival. We'll see you back here in the Seoul studio next week.
Look forward to it.
Good afternoon. Our chilly morning is turning into a warm afternoon under plenty of sunshine, and the highs will be peaking in the mid to upper 20s in many regions. So the big gap in temperature continues today. There's over 10 degrees difference between the daily lows and highs across the nation, so please dress accordingly to avoid catching a cold. With that, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. Now, the high in the capital will soar to 27, while Daegu and Gwangju will peak at 26 and 28 respectively. Now, for other regions, Daejeon and Jeju will peak at 27 and 23, while Dokdo rises to 20 this afternoon. Well, it seems like the delightful autumn weather should continue through the weekend, with highs remaining on the warm side under lots of sun. So I hope you get to make the most of the nice weather conditions this weekend. But that's all for Korea, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
And that's all we have for you now. Our next newscast is at 4 p.m. Korea time. I'll see you then.